What's up guys, it's me Jeremy. The patch 6.7 notes are out, and with every new patch bringing us a bunch of buffs and nerfs to different aspects of the game, there's a whole bunch of hidden or indirect buffs as a result. As well, I've partnered up with ProGuides.com for the editing on this video. They recently released a new service that allows you to ask questions to higher ranked players and get a reply within just 3 minutes. And they also have a free trial that gets you full access, so you don't have to hear from me. You can decide for yourself if you like it or not. And if you enjoyed the video, hit that like button, and if you don't, please hit that dislike. Anyways, let's get started. The first group of champions that is receiving an indirect buff on patch 6.7 is one that I think is quite interesting, because it's late game scaling champions. In patch 6.7, the death timers from the 30 to 55 minute mark are going down, and because of that, the games will be a little bit harder to close out. In a sense, shorter death timers equals longer games, because you won't be able to capitalize on as many objectives around the map after getting some kills, so you won't snowball as hard. Deaths during the mid game will be less punishing, and this will allow games to draw out a bit longer, and in any game that draws out, well, that's the dream for any late game scaling champion. Another group of champions receiving an indirect buff are the Bruiser and Brawler melee top laners, specifically the ones who weren't building tank items. This is happening for two major reasons. First off, we have the nerf to Warlord's Bloodlust. This is kind of a weird change since it was only really a nerf to ranged champions, and it's a bad keystone mastery for AD carries down at the bot lane. Well, this nerf is targeting the ranged top lane bullies, most notably Graves. This change is going to hurt the sustain of those types of champions, again, mostly just Graves, and Graves taking a hit is a minor buff to all other top laners. But the bigger catalyst for this change are the nerfs to Rammus and to Poppy. Rammus and Poppy were powerful tanks that were still able to output a ton of damage to the point where these Bruisers and Brawlers never stood a chance in a fight versus them, and would get outscaled quite hard as well. This nerf to those two tanks, who were not only powerful but also quite popular choices for top lane, allows the Bruisers to see a better matchup a bit more often, since Poppy and Rammus will be played less, and even when they do get played, they'll be weaker in comparison. Another group of champions receiving an indirect buff are the AP mid laners, and as well the AP top laners. Once again, this is happening for a few reasons. The top laners benefit from the nerfs to Poppy and Rammus that I mentioned previously in the last change. Same deal there, same stuff going on. Those tanks were just tough matchups for AP top laners. As well, for both lanes, you have the nerf to Maw of Malmortius. Maw of Malmortius was a seriously strong item that was a huge counter to those types of champions, both in lane and in teamfights. On assassins and tanks and bruisers alike, Maw was the go-to item when facing an AP champion in lane, and for good reason. With Maw getting toned down a bit, we'll see those AP solo laners get a little bit of a boost up, since their opponents building Maw will be a little bit less powerful now, especially in those intense one-on-one duels that come down to the wire. As well, for the mid laners, we have the nerfs to Corki and Zed. Corki and Zed especially were solid counterpicks to the AP mid laners, and the fact that they received direct nerfs is going to help those AP mid laners just a bit, especially for their laning phase. Zed was tough for those matchups because he has a powerful laning phase backed up by a strong all-in potential and mobility, and on top of that he can build a Maw. While Corki's long range comboed with his mobility and massive poke gives him a strong matchup in most laning phases during the mid lane, and the AP mid laners were no exception. It should be a nice boost comboed with the Maw change that will allow you to find better matchups more often when playing on an AP mid laner or on an AP top laner. Another group of champions receiving an indirect buff on this patch are poke support champions, especially the lane bully ones like Karma and Lulu. This change is happening as a result of the Soraka nerf. Soraka's been in a pretty crazy spot recently, especially in terms of her win rate, so she's getting some much needed hits to her mana costs. Those mana costs affect her laning phase quite a lot, which is great for those poke supports who tended to be lane bullies in the laning phase, but previously Soraka was just so tough to keep up with and would out-heal them pretty much every time. Although Soraka might still out-heal you, she now at least has the potential to run out of steam eventually. And most importantly, whenever a champion gets nerfed, the biggest thing to think about is that their popularity goes down quite a lot and they get played less, even if they're still strong. It's just the typical player-based reaction to any nerf on any patch, to anything really. And with that nerf, Soraka is going to get played less, which means that on those poke support champions, you'll see a better matchup in more games. And this one is especially important because Soraka is hell for those champions. Like, it's a huge counter pick and makes it really tough to win lane, which is their biggest strength in the first place. And next up, we have an indirect buff to warrior enchantment based junglers. Quite a few junglers got nerfed on this patch. We have Udyr, Kindred, and Nidalee taking direct hits. It's a wide array of junglers. You got Kindred, the early game beast, Nidalee, the Runic Echoes queen, and Udyr, the king of just about everything else. So although most junglers are benefiting from this change, I think the ones that benefit the most are in fact the warrior junglers, since they are kind of the weaker junglers at the moment, especially for solo queue. Sure, the tanks and the devourer junglers benefit a little bit as well, but the warrior junglers benefit a bit more, especially from the Kindred and Nidalee nerfs. Warrior junglers often rely on having a strong early game, but those two champions really put a thorn in their side when it came to that gameplay by being dominant in the early game, but also a little bit more useful later in the game when even or behind. Warrior junglers rely on getting a lead since they lack utility for the most part, with the exception of Kindred and maybe Lee Sin if you have really good mechanics. So those nerfs help them out a pretty decent amount. As for what you can expect will go down on patch 6.7, the biggest winner of the patch is Aurelia actually, because she's literally the only champion that was actually buffed on this patch. And the biggest loser is probably Poppy, as that nerf to her range is quite significant, although she will perform better against tanks on the flip side, since that percent max health damage on her Q went up by 1% despite the base damage hits. The Death's Timers change is probably the one that will influence the meta the most, as that kind of thing can actually have a huge effect on objective play during the mid game, so consider maybe trying out a late game champion or two if you haven't already. And as well, the rotating game mode queue will be active on this patch this week starting with Ascension, so definitely give it a go as it's received a lot of changes and improvements from a couple years back when it was first released. If you want to see the full patch notes, I'll link them in the description, but either way, that's just about it. If you enjoyed the video, subscribe if you want. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.